How did Barry Goldwater lay down the foundation for modern conservatism? Okay, yeah, that really, if you're looking at this, if we want to use like Christian terminology, that Reagan, if Reagan is Jesus to the conservative Republicans, and you hear that like when Republicans talk about Reagan, it's almost like a Christian talking about Jesus. Now, Barry Goldwater, if Ronald Reagan was Jesus, the savior of the conservative movement, Barry Goldwater was John the Baptist. Now, of course, I would say we all know what happened to John the Baptist, but not everybody does. John the Baptist was beheaded, okay, that things didn't end up so well for John the Baptist. Now, Barry Goldwater in the election of 1964, it was pretty much like that. Barry Goldwater in 1964 secured the Republican nomination. Now, Ronald Reagan was somebody who supported Goldwater, actively supported him, which there's a speech. I don't know if you've run into this speech before, but Reagan gave a speech in 1964 called A Time for Choosing. And it really is a brilliant speech. I mean, if you're somebody, especially if you're somebody who leans more like right or conservative, Ronald Reagan was talking about, basically, he said, you can't control the economy without controlling people. Okay. So the conservatives wanted less government control over the economy, less social welfare programs and government spending. Now, as far as that goes, Lyndon Johnson got elected in 1964 and brought about the Great Society programs and that sort of thing. Now, the thing is with Goldwater, I mean, he got trounced, okay? But Goldwater was the person who, excuse me, was the first person to really articulate this conservative vision, okay? So yeah, basically that's how he's laying the foundation. Now, another thing about Goldwater is he was a supporter of states' rights. Now, as far as that goes at the time, remember the biggest states' rights issue was, was integration. And so Barry Goldwater really got the most support, and this was kind of the irony there, that in 1964, let me get this open, get my screen shared for you. Okay, so in 1964, Barry Goldwater carried his home state of Arizona. And then you can see here that he also carried 5 states in the Deep South: South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. Now, remember that between the Civil War, between the end of Reconstruction and World War II, the South was pretty much a solid Democratic stronghold, okay? So you had the solid South. And so now you see that these states are voting Republican. Now, these are also, when you look at 64, these are also a lot of the same states that in, if we go to 1948, okay, if we go to the 1948 presidential election, and this is, of course, the one where the Dixiecrats challenged Harry Truman, we see that 4 of those states voted for Strom Thurmond in 1948. Okay, so a lot of those same states. And then if we go to 1968, now that's the one. Sorry about that. Okay, 1968.svg. All right, so 1968, you can see there where you've got, here as far as George Wallace. When George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, ran in 1968, you see a lot of these same states as well, like Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Now, note here, by 1968, you've got several of these states that are voting Republican. They're voting for Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon deliberately courted Southern white voters who were disaffected by the Democratic Party. And so by the time you look at 1972, okay, so when you go to 1972, Nixon's got this, this 49 state victory. Watergate was really the most unnecessary. I mean, that's really the irony of Watergate, is if there was any election where there's no reason to break into Democratic Party headquarters, this is it, okay? Now, the thing is that Nixon, I don't know if you necessarily call him a conservative, but he courted conservatives. And in 1968 and 72, he had the advantage where the Democrats picked candidates from the left wing of their party to run. Now, when we go to 1976, the Democratic Party nominated Jimmy Carter. And you see here that besides Virginia, when they nominated a Southerner that was from the more moderate wing of their party, you see here where Carter was able to carry all of the Southern states except for Virginia, and to bring about a victory there. Now, of course, then you've got 1980. And the South's kind of abandoned Jimmy Carter at that point. And so with that, now, of course, the South, Southern white voters, when we look at 1992, okay? So 1992, you can see where the South is split, because once again, just like they did in 1976, the Democratic Party nominated somebody who was a Southern governor from the moderate wing of their party. And so, of course, there was also the issue of having a third party candidate, Ross Perot, who was siphoning more from the Republican candidate than from the Democratic candidate. But you can see here where, Clinton, the Clinton-Gore ticket is carrying several Southern states. But ever since then, ever since the 2000 presidential election, the South has been a pretty reliable Republican stronghold for the most part. Okay, again, sorry about that. All right, but yes, Barry Goldwater is basically the one laying the foundation. The first Republican candidate since the end of Reconstruction to pull votes from Southern states. Okay, and so as far as that goes, let's go ahead and what were the impacts of Reaganomics